Welcome back to the South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast by Ohio State fans for Ohio State fans, which you can now get on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, and SoundCloud. From San Francisco, I'm your host, Zach Moore. This morning, I'm very happy to be joined in the Eastern Time Zone by Chad and Matt. We are not trained media professionals. We are not former players or coaches. We do not have access to current Ohio State players and coaches. We are Ohio State alums, rabid Buckeye fans, observers from afar who love talking Buckeye football. And we hope you'll enjoy this free-flowing conversation this morning about Ohio State's 48-7 demolition of the Nebraska Cornhuskers just last night in Lincoln. I just want to mention a few numbers to put this game into context, then we'll go around the horn to get some initial impressions. Last night was Ohio State's fourth straight victory of 40 points or more. That ties the 1974 Buckeyes for the longest streak of 40-point wins by any Big Ten team since the end of World War I. Wow. Credit to Jason Starrett of The Athletic for that little factoid. Now through 5 games, Ohio State has outscored its opponents 262-43. Whoa. Among the notable national analysts who are fully on board the Ohio State bandwagon are ESPN's Kirk Herbstreit and The Athletic's Stuart Mandel, who have both elevated the Buckeyes to number 1 in their power rankings. Last night, Ohio State was led by emerging star Justin Fields, who in just over 3 quarters of action finished 15 of 21 for 212 yards and 3 passing touchdowns. And we also saw Fields unleashed as a runner for the first time this season, as he finished with 95 yards on 12 carries and a touchdown. J.K. Dobbins shredded the Nebraska defense for 177 yards on 24 carries in only 3 quarters of action. At receiver, the Buckeyes were led by senior Austin Mack, who finished with 66 yards on 3 receptions. Mack had 2 big plays last night that have been making the rounds on Twitter. He put a Nebraska defensive back on skates on a go route early in the game that went for 38 yards. Then late in the second quarter, Mack caught an 18-yard TD pass on a perfect throw from Fields, wrestling the ball away from a Nebraska defender in the back of the end zone. It was quite a catch. On defense, Ohio State limited Nebraska's high-powered offense to a paltry 231 yards of total offense. The Silver Bullets finished with 11 tackles for loss, 4 sacks, and 3 interceptions, 2 from Jeffrey Okudah, who, in my opinion, is now a legitimate Thorpe Award candidate. And while he was credited with only 1 sack, Chase Young was a menace, harassing Adrian Martinez all night long. Linebackers Malik Harrison and Baron Browning led the Buckeyes in tackles with 7 apiece. It was actually nice to see linebackers leading Ohio State in tackles instead of defensive backs. It's quite refreshing. So to get us started with some initial impressions, I'm going to read this text I have here from our compatriot Tim, who had some family obligations this morning and couldn't be with us. Tim says, "Great performance, but too much talk about Ohio State being the number 1 team in the country and too much national title talk. Let's slow down," he says. As Tim has mentioned before on previous pods, Ohio State is doing what it should be doing versus teams like Nebraska and Cincy and Indiana, which are mid-level teams in his opinion. Ohio State is elite. 48-7 is very good, Tim says, and it's a good step forward. But he doesn't like the leaps from the broader press, including Kirk Herbstreit, saying that Ohio State is the number 1 team in the country. In Tim's opinion, we should slow our roll a little bit. And he says we should wait until we see how Ohio State looks against the likes of Wisconsin and Penn State before we get too excited. Okay, with all that out of the way, Chad, I'm going to kick it to you because you pretty much nailed the score prediction for this one. 47-7, I think, was your prediction. So why don't you get us started with some initial impressions?
Hey, guys. Good morning. Good to be on with you.
Good morning.
2 this morning. Hey, Salona, what's up? See? So I just want to, allude to real quick to Debbie Downer's text, Tim. And I although I do agree with them, but I was, pretty stoked and excited this morning. But, I agree with him. As excited as I am, a lot of this horn blowing is making me a little nervous. But, I think the only team that we have to worry about moving forward is ourselves. So, as I mentioned, and we got the new sheriff in town, Ryan Day. Man, I really like his play calling. It's put together the best staff in college football, in my opinion. I just feel like the defense finally. It's a shame, that we didn't have, Bill Davis was still our linebackers coach. Giano nuts. Like, do you imagine? Like, it's so refreshing to see Browning, who I love. I mean, he came out of one of the top-rated linebacker in the country, and he led the team with tackles. Last night with Malik Harrison, and it's so refreshing. But I'm really just impressed with the offense, and I think you'd mentioned this earlier, but that move that Matt put on that kid was just insane.
Yeah.
And Victor had a great catch. I mean, Olave had a couple nice catches. Fields, I think his arm is as impressive as his feet, to be honest with you. I mean, he's got just such nice poise. It's so great to see. Our offensive line, I haven't seen an offensive line, I don't think. I mean, it's good. Maybe one other in my lifetime as a big time Buckeye fan, but I'm just excited about the whole thing. Like, Kuda, he is, like you said, he is definitely for the historical word. But I think we're hitting on all cylinders. Obviously we just got to. I think Dave's going to keep him level headed and not let the media hype get to him. And I think I've said this a couple times before, but as much as I did like Urban, I'll take Day any day of the week, but I don't think he's going to let us have a letdown game. But overall, grade for the team, I mean, it's got to be an A, all around. Yeah. Offensive line, offense, defense. I mean, it's good. And Dobbins is a beast, and I'll tell you what, the future is so bright with Mr. Master Tig. That kid is a beast. He just runs through people, and it's great. So nice to see.
Yeah, he looked great.
He did, so.
Excellent.
But yeah, I'm pretty stoked about that 47-7 prediction. I know we're going to do on our Wednesday night cast. We do a couple predictions for the listeners of the South Stands. But I got you 1 or 2. I picked the Clemson North Carolina game, but I had Virginia in the Notre Dame.
Nice.
Although they should have covered, but yeah. So
all right.
I'm excited, man.
Great. Excellent. Good take. Matt, what did you see last night that stood out?
First of all, that was a lot of congratulations going around. I didn't think I'd get a parade this early in the morning. Thanks, Plum Dog. You know what? The game before ours was Clemson and North Carolina with the number 1 team. So making that transitions from that game to what we saw later, especially the 2 quarters of our ball that came after that, I could see how people can get that perception. And honestly, like that, you can't have 2 quarters of ball that we played 38, going to halftime 38-0. I mean, that's like a Buckeyes wet dream. I mean, you're just the defense, the offense, all working on all cylinders. I guess Akuda listened to my suggestion and had got a new pregame routine because he came out firing.
Yes, he did.
You did make that call, Slutter.
The thing that I wonder about, and this to Tim's point, is that was 2 quarters of perfect football. Can they do that for 4 quarters? At least that level of intensity, and the less that type of focus, that type of the play calling was like, I gave up trying to predict what was coming next because they were doing such a good job mixing it up.
Oh yeah.
The thing that impressed me the most, that someone who with as much experience is, and he's a sophomore, so take that with a grain of salt, is that he looked unsettled quickly. Like that second series, his things off the back foot. He was moving, throwing not assured passes. And it wasn't until that scoring drive that he looked like he knew what he was doing out there. And I think that was only because he ran off that long run for, I forget how much it was, but we just looked really strong. I am impressed by Fields even more. He did an excellent job. Alabi, who came in, that was was a concern with a lot of the people being out.
Yeah,
and they stood up. And I got to say, as much as I like Orland as a leader, I think the future is Browning and Harrison.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
They just looked infinitely quicker. They got to the ball faster. Even when they went the wrong direction, they were able to recover quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, I mean, dude, J.K. Dobbins could end up being the second leading rusher in Ohio State history. He went for a quiet 177 yards.
Yeah.
And could have gotten a lot more. He got taken out of the game after the third quarter, I believe.
Yeah, that's right.
So he's like number 10 all time. And, whether you like those things or not, it's impressive if he moves past like Eddie George as a second leading rusher in history. So I think that you saw a complete team. You saw a great game plan. What heartened me afterwards, like Halfley talking about not the team, they shouldn't have scored that 7. He was ticked off about that, and that's what kind of response you want your coaches to be. Because I agree with Chad. Day, he looks like just a sniper, man. He's ruthless, and he's got this team with a not an arrogance, but a confidence that is translating on the field.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. I said a couple of podcasts ago, and this was after the Indiana performance, that Ohio State was starting to show the markings of a title contending team, and they've only those stripes have only continued to come out. I'm only getting more and more evidence that that's what this team is. You mentioned, Matt, that it got to a point offensively where it was very difficult to know what was coming from the Ohio State offense. And there was a moment in the broadcast which I thought was really illuminating. Kirk Herbstreit went through 4 or 5 different he illustrated 4 or 5 different formations that Ohio State had come out in. I think it was like 5. And he was showing just the versatility and the variance of all these different formations Ohio State was showing Nebraska. 2 tight end sets, 5 receiver sets. There was a play, I think it was at the second scoring drive, Ohio State's second scoring drive in the game. It was 3rd and long. And it was just a very simple movement where they had one of the tight ends go in motion, and that brought the safety to the other side of the field, which cleared the entire right side of the field for Fields to just take off and run right at the snap and get an easy 12, 13 yards on 3rd and 10. And of course, Herbstreit went nuts after that play, breaking it down. And it's little things like that. Ohio State just seems to scheme up opponents now more than they did in the latter years of the Urban Meyer regime. And that's very refreshing. I think the first few years of the Meyer regime, you saw a lot more of that. He had Tom Herman as a young star offensive coordinator. And then there was a lull there between 16 and 18 where Ohio State came into games like this against opponents like Nebraska and they were overly reliant on their talent, it seemed, and they weren't scheming quite as much. So that's one thing that stood out to me in the game yesterday was just the variety of formations, the very quick adjustments to what Nebraska was doing, especially on the defensive side. You saw Nebraska go old school Nebraska with a kind of a triple option look on several plays, and they started to move the ball on their second or third possession of the game and got down into the red zone. Ohio State adjusted very quickly to that. So that's really one of the things that stood out to me. To go along with their immense talent, they now really scheme up their opponents and do things to really kind of to confuse their opponents, which just makes them lethal. It makes them so dangerous when you don't know what's coming and you're dealing with, a reserve of ridiculous talent. I wanted to spend a little time getting your guys' impressions of just the overall improvement of the defense. We touched on it a little bit, but I honestly thought that this game would be a test, at least for the defense. I thought this Nebraska offense had what it took to really push the Ohio State defense. And they held Adrian Martinez to 47 yards passing, 8 completions for 47 yards passing, 3 interceptions. They sacked him 4 times. It was not a test. Chad, you're the only one of us that saw this coming, apparently, with your prediction. But what did you guys make of what you saw out of the defense last night? Chad, do you have any observations about that?
Well, yeah, I do. And one thing that is just such a breath of fresh air from the last couple of years is you've got, Madison Al Washington and Hafley, but they're just letting these kids, these 4 and 5 star athletes that have speed, chase the ball as opposed to trying to do this bullshit like NFL defense, like Shiano was trying to put in. And you're seeing it, like, Browning. I mean, could you imagine, like, if he would have been, like, in this system, like, when he first came in, what he would be now? I mean, he'd probably be in the NFL already. You know what I mean? But it's so nice to see, like, we've got your defensive line, with some players out. They're attacking the ball. I mean, Pete Werner last night had one of the best hits I've seen this season. I don't know if you guys recall seeing that.
I do.
That kid. Oh, man.
On Wandale Robinson,
Stars.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. And that one hit that Akuda where he took out the legs
that was beautiful.
Washington, and he was limping off the field. But it's so great to see him just like using their speed to just chase the ball down, and it's great.
Yeah, that was part of Ryan Day's promise.
Excited.
Yeah, Ryan Day had promised when he took the job that they would simplify the defense so their players could play fast and they wouldn't have to think too much. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing, to your point. And in the case of Browning, I think two things are happening. You've got a simpler scheme that's allowing him to just use his athleticism and not think too much, but he's got a better position coach. Let's face it, right? And I think you made reference to Bill Davis, who was the bartender at Urban Meyer's wedding or whatever his relationship was to Urban Meyer, versus Al Washington now. Clearly, Browning is getting the tutelage he needs at the finer points of his position, and he's also playing in a scheme that allows him to just react and not think too much. Matt, what else did you see from the defense?
I mean, to me, this defense, the thing that's the biggest that I noticed is a couple things. One is that they make great adjustments. What I've seen is that it's almost like they relish, like the coaching staff relishes that when their team is being challenged, that they can think of schemes that they can make things like almost like an anaconda-ish, kind of pressure that just kind of squeezes them. I mean, you look at the first half, they had 6 first downs, and I think 3 of them were only in one drive.
Yeah.
And I was reading on 11 Warriors, their first half possessions were an interception, 3 and out, an interception, 3 and out, 3 and out, and 3 and out. I mean, dude, you cannot get more. You can't get more. That's just that. I mean, that's what you. I mean, you can't have a stronger or more stifling defense. And when you have a stifling defense and an offense that likes to score points, defense gets the rest, offense gets to do their thing, and that's going to wear down the opposing team's defense significantly. So, like seeing that, that's the biggest difference. I think that they have had the talent in the past, but they have found at least the position coaches who know really how to harness the talent of these guys and then make it to where they can apply it toward a scheme or a strategy that really makes it effective. Now, we'll see it when they go up against talented offenses, but gosh, you can't. It's just you had to have a grin every time the defense comes out, and usually it's the other way around. You're like looking forward to the O coming out, but I look forward when the D gets on the field because it's like you got so many players up there who could do things. And you want to see them challenge to see how they react to it. And so far, they've been reacting really well.
It's been really impressive. Yeah, I mean, I thought going into this game that Adrian Martinez would be the best quarterback they'd face during the regular season. And I think that still could be the case. You mentioned talent on offense. I don't know where that's going to come in the regular season. I don't know that there is an offense in the Big Ten that's going to present talent to challenge that defense. I was listening a little bit to the Cleveland.com Buckeye Talk pod this morning just to kind of get a sense of what their takeaways were. And the question came up from one of their users, one of their listeners was, what unit is better now? Is it the defense or is it the offense? And I thought that was very interesting. Why don't I get your guys' take on that? Which of those two units do you think is better right now? Chad, what do you think?
You know what? It's hard to say, man. I mean, as electrifying as our offense is, which it's so refreshing. I think Sloaner said something about this earlier, about predictability. I mean, you know, over the last, 3 years, we'd be on our text thread, and, you know, there's been many times where, you know, Sloaner or somebody would predict, they're going to try to, run Barrett around the field or whatever. That's not, no, we have so many different plays that Day has, introduced into this offense that, it's just, everybody's guessing, what are they going to do? I mean, we've got our receiving core is just, it's sick. You've got that offensive line, which is just moving people out of the way.
Yes, they are.
And,
yes, they are.
Running game. But then if a play breaks down, Fields has the speed. I mean, when he just gallops up the field. It's insane. It's crazy. But, on our defense, man, it's just so, I've said it many times, it's so refreshing to see how they're playing now. So, I'll be honest with you, Z, I don't know that I can say which I think is better. I think we've got a nice balance, and that's pretty much the way I see it. But also, before we get to Sloaner, our buddy Paige wanted to tell everybody he was out till about 4:30 this morning, so he was unable to join us. But he said he'll be back on Wednesday.
Yeah, that was probably after I talked to him last night, probably the easiest thing you could predict from yesterday's action was that Paige would be unavailable for the podcast today.
But that
fan issues.
That's only 2 a.m. Mountain Time, so that doesn't really make it that impressive overall.
Yeah, exactly.
So Matt, if given the choice between the two, who would you go? Which unit do you think is the better of the two right now?
The defense. Here's the only reason why. When we would watch Ohio State in the last couple of years, we just basically needed our offense to do better than their offense because our defense was hit or miss. And we haven't really played a good defensive team. We have played teams that have been primarily known for their offense.
That's a good point.
And to shut teams down and keep no team, I don't think no one's gone over 20, right?
I think, yeah, well, we got Florida Atlantic did. I don't have the score. I think they had 21 or in the neighborhood of 21. I don't have the score in front of me.
Okay.
But
So, but we have, 117?
Yeah.
Whatever. But the defense and how we have not had to rely on the offense to win the game.
Yeah.
The defense on the whole is winning it for us in my mind because they're just having such an impact and having such a crushing effect on the team's offensive strategy, the offensive team strategies that are coming at them. That it makes watching them much more enjoyable, but also much more relaxing.
Yeah,
because I'm not wondering about anything coming out in the late minute. They're going to apply the pressure and possibly get a turnover. They've been doing really well at that.
Yeah. So you're right. The defense has been the difference this year as compared to last, and that's why this team is now is almost kind of a consensus number one team in the country, depending on which expert you speak to. But it sounds like all of them, certainly anyone whose opinion really matters, seems to be in agreement that Ohio State is the best team in the country right now, and it's largely because the defense. One of the guys on the Cleveland.com pod said that he felt the defense was better because they have two elite players in Chase Young and Jeffrey Okudah. And that, in his mind, is the difference. You got two guys that are probably going to be top 10 picks in the NFL draft, which I thought was an interesting point. It's just a fun talking point. I don't know what I would say either. I guess I'd lean a little bit more toward the defense because they have been the difference maker this year. But it has been very refreshing to watch, and I think they're only going to get better, which is a scary thought.
Yeah,
love it.
I wanted to spend a little time talking about that offensive line, and I wanted to try and put some historical context on it if we could. I said I thought a couple of weeks ago I thought the offensive line, and again they were down one starter, yesterday, as you guys both know. Matt, I believe it was you who mentioned that Josh Allaby had to move into right tackle last night, and they still looked as dominant as they have all year. This line looks like the type of offensive lines we had circa 2013 through 2015.
Yeah.
Maybe going back to the Orlando Pace offensive lines of the mid to late 90s, the 95, 96 lines. That's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing incredible push. There were several plays. I didn't have the time to pull out my camera and take a video of it while I was watching, but there were several short yardage plays where the push was so immense that the ball carrier, whether it be Dobbins or Teague, was able to easily convert. They weren't even touched for 2 or 3 yards because the push was so immense. I think we've got the makings of an elite offensive line, and certainly that's the difference between a championship level team and kind of just a Big Ten contending team. What are you guys seeing out of the offensive line? Chad, why don't I start with you? What do you see?
I see depth, like you had mentioned earlier, that like we haven't seen in a long time, man. I bet Josh Myers he's a beast. Wyatt Davis, he came out of a 5-star recruit, and then it's great to see these guys moving people off the line. And you know what, Nebraska, yeah, they had some big boys on that defensive line, and they were pushing people off. And one thing that I'm so excited for is the depth that we have there. And you've got guys like Harry Miller, who's a freshman that could play center right now. And
that's right.
You're talking about putting him being the starter at center next year and moving Myers over to right guard. But the depth, it's just great to see. Fields has a lot of time back there. And they're creating holes, pushing people off the line. It's so good to see that.
Yeah.
And one thing I did, none of us have really talked about. I could be wrong on this, but I think we only had one penalty in the first half.
That's a good point.
That is huge, man. That's but in the last couple of years, there's been so many false starts and all that bullshit, and it just I think we had one. That's big, man.
I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah,
I'm glad you brought that up, Chad. Ohio State finished last night with only 2 penalties for 25 yards. One of them was on that first possession where Harrison was flagged for a late hit out of bounds, which I actually didn't mind so much because to me I felt like that to me said Ohio State was coming out with a nasty disposition, which you need to have. To your point about the depth, Chad. Brandon Bowen was unavailable last night at right tackle, and really Ohio State had 2 legitimate options to replace Bowen. Nicholas Pettit-Ferrer, who's a young guy. He's a redshirt freshman.
He's going to be a beast.
He is going to be a beast. And they were neck and neck for that right tackle spot during fall camp, and Bowen edged him out. But they decided to go with the veteran Allaby last night, and he was great. So to me, that just speaks.
Up, man.
He did the ridiculous depth of talent that they have along the offensive line, and you could sense that from the coaching staff during fall camp. They had a quiet confidence about the line. You could sense it that they knew they had something special. Matt, you were going to make a comment about the offensive line. Go ahead.
Yeah, first half, 230 yards rushing, 7.9 per pop, man. Dude, yeah. That's amazing. So what just optically, and I know that's a very annoying sounding word, but I'm going to use it because I'm in an annoying sounding mode, is that they looked poor, and I think this is tied into Chad's point about the penalties. It's the poise. They look poised. Mm-hmm. They're executing. Yeah. When you put poise and you're sticking to your plan and doing what you're tasked with, you're not going to have penalties, and you're going to have a runner who's going to be able to hit the pocket and go for 7, 8, 10, 15 yards.
Yeah.
The inconsistencies of the past, the irregularities in execution, or, we'd get that penalty and the guy would be like, oh, me. These guys know what they're doing out there because it seems like it's been drilled into them what they're each are supposed to be doing. So I think that's sort of discipline. Thanks, buddy. I think that sort of discipline is apparent, and hopefully that gets nurtured and developed even further, because we're going to need it going into games in the tougher games against defenses that are a lot more physical, a lot more experienced, and have as much talent.
Yeah, starting next week with Michigan State, we know they're going to bring a good defense into the shoe. Yeah, the attention to detail and the discipline this year is notable. As I said, 2 penalties for only 25 yards, no turnovers. Justin Fields has yet to throw an interception this season through 5 games. Really only one meaningful turnover by the Buckeyes, which was in the opener. That J.K. Dobbins fumbled in that game that set up a field goal for FAU. But that's it through 5 games. And Matt, Matt, I wanted to make a comment about the optics. Actually, optics are important in college football. And I don't find that annoying that you said that at all, because that's what the college football that's what the college football committee, the playoff committee, has been using for the last couple of years. Really, at the end of the day, it's all optics. It's all eye test. True. In my opinion. So optics are very important. It's not just the fact that Ohio State's winning these games, it's the way they're doing it, the dominant fashion that they're doing it. Day knows that, as a program, they know that. This is a team that missed the playoffs barely each of the last 2 years. They were just on the outside looking in. And you can see they know, they understand how it has to be different this year, starting with the little things, penalties, turnovers, and then thorough domination of their opponents. Because certainly in the eye test, they're passing with flying colors right now.
Go ahead, Chad. I just want to give some props, and I have not mentioned him yet this year, because I know last year a lot of people were down on Stud, our offensive line coach, and I'd like to give him some kudos, man, because he's recruiting he's bringing kids in here, and this offense it's fabulous, man. So I just wanted to give him a quick shout out, give him some props, man, because I feel like Stud. I'm glad that they kept him on the staff. Obviously, he saw something in him, so I just want to give him a quick shout out. So
nice one, Chad. Well, so he missed on and Chad, you follow recruiting a little bit more closely than I do, and are tuned in a little bit more to that. But if I'm not mistaken, Stud had a couple of misses, recruiting misses, guys that kids decided to go elsewhere. Maybe Jackson Carman is one player that comes to mind, right? The kid that went to Clemson, and Stud took a lot of heat for that, right? He took a lot of heat for not securing a couple of these recruits. But in terms of what he's done as a position coach, I think you're right. He's done a hell of a job this year. He patched together a pretty solid offensive line late in the year last year too. Remember, Josh Allaby had to start in the Rose Bowl at left tackle. And I thought he did a pretty good job. You're right, man. He's turned out to maybe be an underrated coach on that staff.
Yep.
All right. I wanted to talk a little bit more, and we talked about this in last week's pod, but it came up again last night, which was the play of the wide receivers. And there were 2 notable catches, more than just 2, but the 2 that really stood out to me. And I mentioned Austin Mack's touchdown catch in the back of the end zone at the end of the second half. He wrestled that ball away from a defensive back that was draped all over him, and then we saw a late touchdown. I guess was it a third quarter touchdown by Garrett Wilson in the back of the end zone. Again, both balls were thrown perfectly by Fields, but the concentration and the ability to catch balls that are thrown in tight windows. Guys, they're both contested throws. Wilson catches that ball with, what did he have, 6 inches to get his feet down in the back of the end zone, and he got 2 or 3 steps in before he went out of bounds. We talked about Brian Hartline as the receivers coach, and you can see what the wide receivers are doing now as compared to just a couple years ago. They're going up competing for the football. They're getting separation. They're running clean routes. They're not dropping footballs. I mean, I can't remember the last time one of our receivers had a drop, and I've just been so impressed with the improved play of the receivers. Matt, what are you seeing out of the wide receivers this year?
Go ahead, Chad.
No, you go ahead, Sloan. Sorry.
Oh, thanks, buddy. So what I think it's what kind of talked about last. I think it's just, and it's gone for every position, is that they've been focusing on details that are maybe tangential or things that can auxiliary skills that they could bring in that's helping them with their core play, like with the hand-eye coordination drills, with throwing the tennis ball. I just think these guys have a more of an awareness and ability to make quick second decisions and be able to catch the ball with a lot going on around them. And I think that's been drilled into them. But you can only do, like, talent is only so good, and especially at this level. It could do something against the Miami of Ohio's and Kent State's. Like you can, but like when you get up against elite defenders and elite defenses, and actually if you're being target, like if they're focusing on you as a source of as a playmaker of sorts, like you have to do something above that. And I think these guys have been using their talents and building off of it with skills that are making them very difficult to guard. And if you have a quarterback who can hit them in tight spots, like, I mean, how many of you were almost weeping when you saw that Wilson catch and that throw catch? Dude, and he ran into that wall too, and it's just like and dropped the ball.
Yeah,
and so it was, you see that these guys, the route running, their catching, the concentration, everything's a lot higher. They seem to be mentally welcoming challenges. Like, okay, throw this in a tight spot. Okay, throw this over my shoulder. Okay, throw this in the middle of the pack, and going after it and making the play. And that kind of zest for the ball and making plays. I think the triple distilled smooth Jameson even said to the guys last, like in the fifth, like he told everyone, I read this, he told everyone, I get the ball, I'm taking it to the house. And those guys were laughing at him. And then, last week you got the ball and you took it to the house. I think, but that kind of confidence is less arrogance, because these guys are working their tail off with, with the receipt of Heartline. So it's, that's what I see. I think it's like these guys are snipers out there. Everyone is breathing how the coaches kind of portray us. Like we should have a chip on our shoulder. You guys are talent only takes you guys so far. If you want the ultimate prize, you got to do the ultimate sacrifice and practice and practice and practice. And everyone's doing the work so far. So if they cut the cable so no one can watch ESPN and no Wi-Fi, so they don't have to read their own press clips. I think, they need to keep that chip on their shoulder to help them both in the practice field, but also on the field.
Yeah. Yeah. Jed, what are you seeing from the wide receivers?
Well, sorry, Sloan, I was interjecting there on there. And I guess I just got to get a little excited about this receiving core. So I apologize again there, but this receiving core it's Heartline. Like I think I said this last week, and I think, we've all alluded to it, but Heartline is the man. I love that guy. And what's so nice to see is that I feel like in the past 2 or 3 years, there's been like 1 or 2 receivers that I feel like we're, always throwing to, like McLaren and, and so forth. But we're spreading the ball around, like Victor, Mac, Olave, Garrett Wilson. These guys, like, we're just spreading the ball around, and it's so nice to see. And, I didn't mention anything about it like earlier, but Garrett Wilson, man, that kid is special. And my boy DeMario, he got the call last night that he will not be returning any more punts.
Yeah,
I think we're going to see number 5 back there.
I hope so.
They're like Saunders said. I mean, they're running precise routes. I mean, they're and Fields is putting the ball in there, but some of these catches, man, they're coming down with it like that. It's not easy catches, and they're actually holding on to the ball. And everybody talks about how Alabama's receiving core is so elite, but I tell you what, I got something to say about that. I don't know if like those SEC homers have been watching the Buckeyes, but I think we have a pretty elite receiving core. And, we got Julian Fleming coming in next year, not to get ahead of her, but he's the number one receiver in the country. And, it's so great to see that we're getting these blue chip kids coming in here, and they're exciting to watch, man.
Yeah. What I see that's different from at receiver, that's different from a few years ago, is I think we're getting more natural we have more natural wide receivers on the roster. Yeah, I loved Paris Campbell.
Good point,
but he was a converted running back playing receiver, and it took him at least 3 years to begin making an impact on the field. And only toward the tail end of what was a 5-year career was he able to did drops not become a problem for him. The one thing that I see that's really cool is you see young guys in Olave, who's only a sophomore, and Wilson, who's only a freshman, making immediate impacts as young players. And you see older players who struggled earlier in their career because quite frankly, they weren't getting the coaching they needed, starting to make an impact now, starting to blossom and really leverage their talent. And I'm talking about Ben Victor. He's the first one that comes to mind as a guy who I think Tim had mentioned him as a 4-year project, and it did take him quite a while to really emerge as a receiver. But now he's a guy that he's making an impact early in games. He's a reliable guy that you can go to in any situation. So it really is the best of both worlds. You have young and veteran talent who are all bringing their talent to bear and are highly productive players with this receiving core. And all credit to Hartline, of course. But these kids are also putting in the work. It's very, very encouraging. So that leads me into another discussion I wanted to have about Justin Fields. And it was assumed at the beginning of the season when Fields signed with Ohio State, which again, it just blew my mind that there wasn't more enthusiasm, there wasn't more fanfare around the Fields signing with Ohio State. I thought it was absolutely huge. I thought the sky was the limit after he decided to sign with Ohio State. And the local beat writers especially, but even some of the national pundits were very cautious in their assessment of Ohio State. To me, I was like, I don't know, I was very bullish on it. And anyway, one of the assumptions that was made about Fields was that there was no way he could duplicate what Dwayne Haskins could do. There was no way he could have the arm talent that Haskins had. And I didn't understand why people were just jumping to that conclusion before the kid had taken a single snap at Ohio State. And now I think what we're seeing a quarterback that has every bit the arm talent that Dwayne Haskins does. And he can even do more things as a runner, of course. He adds that dimension. But I saw some of those throws he made last night. Now, he missed on one deep ball to Olave, but those throws to Mack in the back of the end zone, and then also the one to Wilson in the back of the end zone, those were NFL throws. And he's been making those throws all season long. I think
they were.
I think what we're starting to learn about Fields is that he has elite arm talent, and I don't know how you'd want to compare it to Haskins, but I think it's definitely in the neighborhood, and that's surprising a lot of people. Chad, what are you seeing out of Fields that really stands out right now?
Well, yeah. First of all, I bet old Kirby Smart might not be feeling too smart about. I mean.
Yeah,
but the kid he's elite, man. It's great to have because he's got the one thing where I think he's got the advantage over Haskins, and I'll be honest with you, I think his arm strength and accuracy is as good and will be better in next year, whatnot, but better than Haskins. But the kid what impresses me the most about him is his poise. He sits back there, he doesn't, freak out, and he doesn't take off the run.
Mm-hmm.
It's like he has the poise to still even moving around, see the field, and then if he has to take the run, then he does it. But I love his poise. His arm is is great, and he runs like a gazelle. So what is he? 6'3", 230, and runs a 4.340. Come on,
Wow.
The kid's kid's sick. So
Unfair.
I love it. I love Fields.
Yeah. Matt, what comments do you have on Fields?
So well, first of all, it's like we're all like sitting under this wonderful, cozy scarlet and gray blanket, having a drink in our little koozie so our hand doesn't get frosted. We're feeling really good right now. 75 and sunny right now in Buckeye land. Everything is very encouraging, and I'm very happy with his progression for each game. But going back to an earlier point, we haven't played anyone on defense and who has a strong defense. Mm-hmm. The thing that, for me, iron makes iron sharp. So we have not played in a team that has an elite defense that's going to challenge him to where he's pushed mentally to a place where he's got to see where that poise is can really take the hit, and he could be the leader that we at least perceive him to be, and use those skills in the same manner when it's, he uses a skill the same way when it's 42-0 than it is 42-41. Mm-hmm. And I think that for me, the reason I wasn't bullish on Fields, I was encouraged by him coming to Ohio State, is because, frankly, all I saw of his Georgia highlights was running the ball.
Yeah. They didn't ask much of him.
Yeah. So, I mean, and there's a lot of, he came in highly touted, and a lot of time those guys fizzle out.
That's true.
Yeah, I think there's one kid right now who's playing wide receiver who was supposed to be a big arm quarterback or quarterback for us. Anyhow, it's
Tate Martell, backup wide receiver in Miami.
Is that his name?
Yeah.
But I'm very encouraged because you're right. He does have the poise. I would just be the Haskins comparison could be it could be valid. And in truth, he could do much better as a whole as Haskins, especially if we win a championship. Mm. But until we play a team that really brings it defensively and puts him on the ground a couple times, and he looks to be swimming better yet situation we're behind, and it's the fourth quarter, and he's like, okay, Justin, let's see what you can do. And not that I want that to happen, but that's the kind of situation that you want to feel comfortable with your quarterback going into, mm-hmm. because that he's been tested, and he's just going to smile at any challenge that comes his way.
Yeah, well, they're going to see three. They're going to see three good defenses now. These next 3 weeks. Well, not 3 of the next 4 because they have a bye. But their next 3 opponents, you're obviously going to see a really good defense out of Michigan State. They get Northwestern after Michigan State. I think they're a pretty good defense. Maybe statistically they're not showing up as a good defense, but they do play that zone defense. Very difficult to complete balls down the field against that defense. And then, of course, Wisconsin. I think that defense is probably a little overrated, but it should be a good, solid test for Fields. So we'll know soon enough whether what we're seeing out of Fields is fool's gold or if it's something that we can really hang our hats on going forward. Chad, I wanted to go back to the Kirby Smart point you made. He was in a bit of a tough spot that Ohio State fans can probably relate to, because he has a quarterback, a highly productive quarterback in Fromm, who led him to within one play of a national championship the year before, but won a ton of games, has veteran experience. As Ohio State fans, we can relate to that, right? Because we had the J.T. Barrett, Dwayne Haskins dynamic, right? One of the knocks on Fields that some Ohio State fans had when Fields came was like, well, he couldn't beat out Jake Fromm at Georgia. I'm like, yeah, so what? I mean, we had Dwayne Haskins on the roster for 3 years, who was the best quarterback we had, but he didn't play until his last year, right? I mean, we continue to go with Barrett when clearly Haskins had started to distinguish himself as the better quarterback. So it's not uncommon that a coach sticks with a veteran guy, a proven guy that he trusts, who's won a lot of games, even if maybe he's got a younger guy that's showing more arm talent and has a higher upside. That's not unusual. I think it was just way too early in the game for Kirby to turn to Fields. What can you do? This is the era of the transfer portal. These kids don't have to wait around for their turn. And just a tough break for Georgia. But, hey, we'll take it. I'll definitely take the I'm wondering what else we can cover. We've covered quite a lot. There really wasn't much else to cover from Nebraska. So go ahead, Chad. You got something else you want to talk about?
Yeah, I would like to just make a comment, which impressed the hell out of me, man. Even is the Nebraska fan base
Yeah.
They're getting their asses kicked, man. And the entire, even when they're making a couple drives, they were in that game the whole time, cheering, on the team, backing the team up.
Mm-hmm.
It was great to see. They're getting spanked, and they're still out there cheering when Nebraska's got the ball, and I feel like the wine and cheese crowd is like that at the shoe sometimes when they would just be completely just muted, and I thought that was very cool, man.
Yeah.
So I wanted to get some props out to the Nebraska Cornhusker fans. That was pretty impressive.
All right, shout out to the Nebraska fans. That was pretty impressive. Guys, do we have any other observations from the game last night that we want to mention, or do we want to maybe move over to the national landscape or the Big Ten landscape to see what some other teams did?
Yep, let's move along.
Okay. So I said before we started recording, I think the big question now is, who is Ohio State's biggest challenger, both within the division and then kind of within the conference as a whole? I guess right now, Penn State would seem to be their biggest challenger within the division, unless Michigan can figure out, hey, we got these awesome wide receivers. Why don't we start getting the ball to these guys? Maybe Michigan can somehow turn it around. But to me, it looks like it might be Penn State in the East is Ohio State's biggest challenger. Would you guys agree with that? Chad, what do you think? Chad, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, buddy. Sorry.
Yeah.
I think next week, man. Dan D'Antonio always seems to pull some shit out of the bag of tricks against Ohio State. But even though I think like I've already said, the new sheriff of town, I don't think we're going to have a letdown game. But I think Michigan State's got an elite defense. So, and going back to Sloaner's point, where we haven't played anybody, but I think we're going to see if this poise that Fields has is real against an elite defense next week. Penn State, I think, is probably, our biggest concern. But, obviously going up into, Michigan in the bowl, which is the worst stadium in the fucking country. But, they're going to play us tough. They are. I mean, regardless if they lose 2 more games, it's not going to be a fucking walk in the park. I mean, I hope it isn't a total ass beating, but I probably not. But I would probably say Penn State, in my opinion. But next week, and Northwestern though, that Friday night game, man, you never know what could happen.
That kind of has trap game. That kind of has trap game written all over it, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
So you would agree then? It sounds like you're agreeing with it. Penn State's probably their biggest challenger in the East. What do you think, Matt?
Well, looking at the schedule, I think we basically ran the 2 away games that were the most concerning. Northwestern could be a trap game, but let's be honest, we're gonna, if we come off strong against and take out Michigan State, then Northwestern won't be a problem.
That shouldn't be close, and we're coming off a bye into that game too, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. The thing that I would say that may be lightly controversial is that I think Penn State may become our Michigan game from now on. Meaning the one game that's at the end of the schedule that we get a little nervous about, and we start thinking about, this is the gatekeeper to us and getting in the playoffs. I just don't think, at least this year and probably next year, as long as Harbaugh is on there, we're not going to have a problem with them because I just don't think that they're equipped. But to your question, Wisconsin definitely in the West and Penn State in the East. Wisconsin will be an interesting game, but that's tempered. Same with the Penn State game that we're playing at home. So we should be able to handle business.
Okay,
too tight.
Yeah, sorry about that. Thank you. So to me, Penn State looked like it looks like they might actually have a decent quarterback. First of all, any team that's going to challenge Ohio State has to have a good quarterback. I'm sorry, Wisconsin. You have to have better.
Agreed.
You have to have better than a noodle-armed Opie Taylor running your offense. Sean Clifford against Maryland almost went for 398 against Maryland on Friday. He's been pretty good this year. He's completing about 66% of his passes exactly, 9 touchdowns, 1 interception. If he continues on that pace, he might be a good enough quarterback that could really challenge the Ohio State defense, and could be a legitimate challenger for Ohio State for the East Division crown. Certainly, Penn State has been the last 3 years, so I don't think you're off base saying, Matt, that it's certainly, at least within the recent history and in the short term, Penn State might be Ohio State's biggest rival or their biggest roadblock to an East Division crown. In the West, let's not forget about Iowa, by the way. I actually think Iowa's got a better...
That's true.
Very similar to Wisconsin in many ways. They have an identity. You know what they're going to do. Not an explosive offense, but I actually think Nate Stanley's a much better quarterback. I would not be surprised if Iowa has a little something to say in the West before it's all said and done. But yeah, Penn State looks... I was impressed with what they did at College Park on Friday. I think Maryland has at least an explosive offense, and to completely shut down that offense the way that they did and embarrass Maryland the way that they did, I was impressed by that. I don't think that was just. I don't think that's to be disregarded. I was unimpressed with Wisconsin against Northwestern, and I actually watched that game closely. We talked about this in the prediction pod on Wednesday. I thought this one would be a very close game. I said, don't be surprised if it's like 17-14 Northwestern going into the fourth quarter. That wasn't quite the score, but it was actually pretty close. And Northwestern actually made a push in the end to cut the margin down, but neither team looked very impressive. I thought the quarterback play for both teams was abysmal. Wisconsin's Jack Cohn finished 113 yards passing, 15 of 24. He threw one pick. He is not a dynamic passer. He offers no threat in the passing game. Northwestern knew that. They crowded the box. Jonathan Taylor finished with 119 yards rushing, but that was on 26 carries. Taylor was not a huge factor in that game. I just don't think you can be a one-trick pony like Wisconsin and come into the shoe and expect to compete with Ohio State unless Ohio State somehow it helps them out with turnovers and penalties and mental mistakes, which we've seen very little of so far. Maybe the one benefit Wisconsin has is where that game falls on the schedule. It's at the end of this 4-game gauntlet. Ohio State plays that weird Friday night game the week before against Northwestern. But that also gives Ohio State an extra day to prepare for Wisconsin. I don't know, man. I'm looking at Penn State, and I don't want to look too far down the road, but hey, we're fans. We get to look ahead. We're not playing in these games. To me, it's Penn State, and in the West, I actually like Iowa to come out of the West. Now, they've got a big test in the big house. Yeah, and I like them because I think they've got a better quarterback in Nate Stanley. It'll be interesting to see, let's see, Iowa and Wisconsin. I want to find out where that game is.
It's the 9th of November.
It's the 9th, and that game is going to be played at Wisconsin. So,
yeah.
But I just think the advantage Iowa has at quarterback could be the difference in that one.
Well, you got the next two games. You can either, that opinion will become stronger or weaker because you're playing Michigan at Michigan and Penn State at home. So that will be interesting. You'll either be right on or you're going to be backing away from that pretty quickly.
Oh yeah, boy, that's a tough one. Look at that. So I'm looking at Wisconsin's schedule now. Oof. So Wisconsin goes to Columbus, and then the following week they get Iowa at home. Yikes. And then they go to Nebraska, and we'll see if Nebraska turns it around. That might not be an easy gauntlet for Wisconsin to run. Okay, interesting. Well, it remains to be seen. Clearly a ton of football left to be played. Ohio State has to stay healthy. Matt, you and I were talking a bit about this over text yesterday. You got to keep Justin Fields upright. He took a lot of hits. They really unleashed him in the running game yesterday for the first time. He took a lot of hits. He got popped on a read option play, right, where he gave the ball up. I think it might have been to Teague or to Dobbins, and the safety or the linebacker came up and drilled him as Fields was carrying out the fake. I don't want to see too many more hits like that. He's a big, strapping dude. He can take that kind of contact. But, as deep and as great as Ohio State has looked so far, if anything happens to Fields, that could radically change their fortunes.
Yeah, they're not deep at quarterback.
No. Yeah. And I still maintain that Chase Young is another difference maker, that if they lose him for any length of time, he just makes such a difference in the pass rush. And when he's not out there, they're not getting the same level of harassment and disturbance in the front without him out there. So they got to keep those guys healthy. So health and still a ton of football left to be played.
Yep.
Hey, Chad, one other shout out to you. You called a very, well, certainly an interesting result, if not the upset, yesterday in the Clemson, North Carolina game. That was another game that you called as a tight one. What did you guys see? I know we touched on it a little bit earlier, but what did you guys see out of that Clemson matchup yesterday that stood out? Chad, why don't you go ahead?
Well, what stood out to me is that Clemson's not as good as advertised. If it wasn't for Trevor Lawrence yesterday with his feet, then their offense was pretty dismal. You know, they had a nice pass to Higgins in the end zone there, but and I mean, I think I'm like maybe the 1%er that likes the call that Matt Brown went for 2 because, like he said, he was going to give them 1:16 left.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, you're at home, and the minimum's on your side, but I like the call going for 2, but
I did too.
I mean, seriously though, the triple option. I mean, come on, dude. Like that was the worst play call ever. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure like Dabo, my boy Dabo, is gonna I mean, they've got a good defense, but I mean, I would love to play Clemson again. Like I would love to play them.
Yeah, careful what you wish for.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, I'd like to pound like Dabo right in the sand. So.
Yeah, I mean, I would enjoy that too.
Yeah, and then Notre Dame, like they, I'm not to go on them, but their defense, like they had 2 returns, like a fumble return and a sack for 2 touchdowns there. But Virginia was like in that game the whole time.
Yeah,
they. 5 turnovers, you're not going to win a ball game. So.
We've seen Clemson
have. And Alabama, who have they played? Like nobody.
Yeah.
Auburn, I think. I mean, like I said last week, I think Auburn looks pretty solid.
You're right. Yeah, you're right.
But,
so you mentioned Auburn last week or in one of our previous pods, and actually they did have a strong showing, and that was another team that a lot of the pundits were talking about last night. Don't count them out. And, I mean, should they be able to get by Alabama and LSU? There's no reason, Auburn. Well, then we'd be talking about Auburn as a playoff contender. The one thing I'll say about Clemson is we've seen them look sluggish in the middle of the season. We saw them a couple years ago. I think they had a home loss to NC State, but then they rebounded and ended up winning the national championship. I wouldn't read too much into the close result yesterday, because we've seen this out of them before. They have a close win or an upset loss, and Sweeney's been able to get them to turn it around, and they're right back in the playoff talk. I mean, the other thing they have going for them is who do they play? I mean, what team remaining on that schedule worries you? I mean, that they don't necessarily have to play all that well to finish undefeated. Matt, what are your thoughts on the national landscape?
So, I mean, on your, you're going to need a little luck sometimes on your way to wearing the crown. And, they got that play call. I think it was great going for 2. To agree with you guys, that was like the best call they could make. And fortunately, Clemson was ready for it.
Mm-hmm.
That they play in such I think it's not even, you can congratulate them and say they play in a subpar conference. It's like subpar. And they don't have, there's no other team that you could, like North Carolina was basically the threat, and they were 26-point favorites.
Yeah.
So it's, they could be a team that likes to coast, and then when you get in the pointy end of the season, then they ratchet it up a bit. They have the players, they have a strong coach, they have a strong coaching staff. So maybe that's the way they like to roll. So I'm just glad our team isn't doing that, because I just think nothing about them is going to make them sharper when it comes time to the playoffs. So, I'd rather be challenged more and then go into the conference final and then the conference championship and the playoff championship, have a couple scars on me and ready to go.
Yeah. Yeah. No, iron sharpens iron, I think you said earlier. Hey, I just want to remind the listeners you're listening to the South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, and SoundCloud. And by the way, you can also find us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You can also direct message us on any of those social platforms. And I also wanted to mention, we just set up a Gmail account for the podcast. You can reach us at thesouthstandsosu@gmail.com with any questions or comments. Again, that's thesouthstandsosu@gmail.com. Hey, fellas, do we have any other comments before we wrap it up? It's been a good effort. We're just over an hour.
Good effort. Oh,
Yeah, good to be on with you boys. And we wanted to give a shout out to our boy Jimmy, too. That couldn't join us today.
Shout out to Jimmy. All right.
all right.
All right, fellas. Hey, well, listen, thanks so much for making the time, and we'll reconvene midweek. I think it'll probably be around Wednesday to do Michigan State predictions.
Rock on.
Thanks.
All right, fellas. Have a good
Have
Sunday.
a good day, brother. Go Bucks.
Go Bucks.